This is a school assignment where we were tasked with showing our understanding of the novel The Alchemist by any means we thought would be fun. I chose to create an overly sarcastic production. Please excuse the rough drawings, and I hope you enjoy. Magical realism. That wonderful genre with many vague definitions and a barely there line between it and fantasy. A great example of magical realism in all its glory is a well-known book called The Alchemist, written by Paulo Coehlo in 1987. It takes place somewhere between the 1500s and 1800s in northern Africa. The story begins in southern Spain with our protagonist, a young man named Santiago, settling his herd of sheep down for the night in an old ruined church with a giant sycamore tree growing where the sacristy was. We learn that he likes to read and that he knows all of his 60 sheep individually. That night, he dreams about a young girl coming up to see his sheep, which makes him nervous as his sheep don't often like people. But the sheep are fine with the girl, and as she comes closer, she takes Santiago's hands and he is transported to the pyramids of Egypt, where she tells him he will find his treasure. He wakes in the morning and wonders if having the same dream twice is important. As he makes his way to Tarifa, the city he must pass through to sell his wool to a merchant and speak with the merchant's daughter again, he remembers there is a woman who lives there who can interpret dreams. He reaches Tarifa, and the woman tells him that the dream is very obvious. Santiago has a treasure buried for him at the pyramids, and she wants 1/10 of it as payment for interpreting the dream. Santiago is annoyed. He could have figured that out himself, and now he owes this random lady 1/10 of a treasure that may not exist. He leaves in a huff, and after trading his book for a new one, sits down to read in the plaza. An old man comes and sits beside him and makes small talk. Santiago tries to ignore him without being rude at first, but upon learning the man had already read the book, he becomes interested. He asks where the man is from, and learns that he is the king of Salem. Santiago doesn't know where Salem is, and is pretty sure this guy wants something from him. The king, who introduces himself as Melchizedek, offers to help Santiago find his treasure in exchange for 1/10 of his sheep. At this point, Santiago is sure he's being scammed by an associate of the dream interpreter. Then King Melchizedek proceeds to write in the dirt the names of Santiago's family, the school he went to, and his secrets they had never told anyone. Now knowing this guy is probably legit, he asks why he came to talk to a lowly shepherd. The king says Santiago has just discovered his personal legend, and the biggest theme of the whole book. Santiago doesn't know what that is, so King Melchizedek reads his mind and answers all his questions. He says a personal legend is a person's deepest desire and goal on the planet, and laments how many people forget that you never have to wait to fulfill it, and you are never too old to begin. He says he appeared before Santiago as he was about to throw it all away by marrying the merchant's daughter and giving up traveling. The king urges Santiago to go find his treasure and fulfill his personal legend, and for the low price of 1/10 of Santiago's flock, he'll tell him the first step, tomorrow afternoon, so Santiago can make his decision. Santiago thinks long and hard about this and eventually decides to do what the king asked, selling his remaining sheep to his friend who had always wanted to be a shepherd. Upon remarking how lucky that was, King Melchizedek tells Santiago about the principle of favorability, or beginner's luck. He says it will soon wear off, but should get him off to a good start. He says Santiago should be sure to follow the omens the rest of the way to the pyramids of Egypt and gifts him 2 stones, Urim and Thummim, to help him read the omens when he is unsure. Santiago accepts the gift and is off on a ship to cross the Straits of Gibraltar. Santiago stops in a bar and, not knowing any Arabic, accidentally orders a bitter tea. He realizes this language barrier is going to be a problem. Someone who can speak Spanish, his language, approaches him and says he can help Santiago. All too ready to trust the stranger, Santiago ends up handing him his money in hopes that he would buy them camels. But the second Santiago gets distracted, the stranger is gone and he is now broke. Feeling sorry for himself, he asks his stones if he will ever find his treasure, to which they both fall out of his bag to avoid answering him. He remembers the king and the idea of fulfilling his personal legend, and decides that instead of the poor victim of a robbery, he is an adventurer on a quest. The next morning he helps a candy salesman set up his tent, and despite not speaking the same language, they communicate well, something that inspires Santiago and further backs up his decision to remain an adventurer. He calls this language without words the universal language, and thinks about how he could speak it with his sheep, and now he must learn to speak it with people. He also needs food, though, so upon finding a shop that says Spanish is spoken inside, he implores the owner to give him a meal, and in return, he will clean the crystals the shop sells to make it more appealing. The shop owner agrees, and once Santiago finishes, they have lunch together at a cafe. Santiago learns from the crystal merchant that it will cost a lot of money to travel to Egypt. Wow, who could have guessed? And even if he worked for the merchant for a year, he would never make enough. Santiago disassociates for a minute, devastated by this information, and decides to work for the crystal merchant until he gets enough money to travel back to Spain and buy his sheep back. Santiago doesn't like his job, but the merchant pays him well, and he comes up with many new ideas that make crystal sales skyrocket. Before he knows it, it's been 11 months and the crystal shop has become the most popular shop in town. Having earned enough money to cross back and buy 120 sheep, Santiago prepares to leave. He thinks about a conversation he had a few days ago, all in Arabic, which he is proud of, with the crystal merchant, where the merchant said there was no way Santiago was going to return home. He thinks about the old king telling him to follow the omens and ponders Urim and Thummim. Suddenly, the thought of going back doesn't sound so happy anymore. He realizes he can go back to being a shepherd whenever he wants, and he might as well continue this journey that he's already spent 11 months on. With a new surge of happiness and confidence, Santiago makes his way to a supply house where he joins a caravan that will take him across the desert. Here we meet the other character on a journey to realize his personal legend, an Englishman hoping to be an alchemist, capable of turning lead to gold and living forever with the elixir of life. He came to Africa to go to Al-Fayoum, where a friend said a real alchemist lived. The Englishman has many books about alchemy and thinks reading is the best way to learn, something that Santiago can never quite wrap his head around. They spend much time together on the journey across the desert, and though they have the same goal, they never come to understand the other. Santiago realizes that's okay. They're both on their journeys to their personal legends, and he can respect the Englishman for that, even if he doesn't understand him. While crossing the desert, Santiago observes the caravan and concludes that the desert speaks its own language, and as long as the caravan will speak it as well, they should arrive at their destination, an oasis town. The caravan grows nervous as word reaches them that there are tribal wars happening, but they must keep going, as that is the language of the desert. Upon asking a caravan leader why he was not nervous, he explained that as long as he lives in the present moment, he will be satisfied. That is also the language of the desert. Santiago is happy to have learned many things and delighted by the sprawling oasis with date trees and colorful tents and wells that greet him when they reach Al-Fayoum. The Englishman and Santiago hang out at a well to ask where the alchemist lives. The people are afraid of them and say they shouldn't get involved in such practices. When Santiago approaches a young woman, not dressed in black because that would mean she is married and he's not allowed to talk to married women, to ask if she knew where the alchemist lived, he makes eye contact and proceeds to be love-struck so hard he is immersed into the soul of the world, where all desires originate. Yikes. The Englishman snaps him out of it, and the woman, whose name is Fatima, tells them the alchemist communicates with the spirits of the desert and indicates he lives south of the oasis. The next day, the two men meet at the well, and the Englishman feels mopey because the alchemist told him he should try turning lead to gold before asking him about it. He leaves, saying he will do just that. Then Fatima returns to the well, and Santiago confesses his love. Startled, she drops her container and says he probably won't keep feeling that way when the war ends and he can leave. But Santiago is determined and makes sure to talk to her at the well every day, telling her about his adventures and all he has learned. They become friends, and after a month, Fatima tells him she feels the soul of the universe shipping them too. She tells Santiago that if he truly loves her, and if they are truly meant to be together, he should be able to finish his journey and come back. She tells him about how the women of the desert know they love their husbands when they can let them go and hope they come back, and accept that they may have become part of the desert, and that that's a great fate to have. Santiago decides to go talk to the desert to see if he can understand this better. He watches some hawks and contemplates being in love, when suddenly a hawk attacks the other one, which causes him to have a vision of an army attacking the oasis. He tries to ignore it, but remembers the king saying he should always follow the omens, and decides to tell the chieftains of the oasis after a conversation with the camel driver of the caravan. The chieftains question Santiago's authority to read the desert, but ultimately decide they will trust his word and pay him greatly if he was correct, but kill him if he wasn't. Having arms at the oasis is against the tradition, after all. As Santiago is walking back to his tent, a man on horseback wielding a sword very nearly attacks him, asking who dared to read the flight of the hawks. Santiago is unafraid, as he says, and I'm quoting here because what a line, "It is I who dared to do so. Many lives will be saved because I was able to see through to the soul of the world." The horse rider considers this and sheaths his sword, only drawing a drop of blood from Santiago's forehead. He explains that he had to test Santiago's courage, as it is the most important quality to have to understand the soul of the world. Santiago is startled at the horse rider's knowledge of this very obscure and confusing thing. He says Santiago should keep going on his journey and invites him to visit, if he's still alive by the end of the next day. He begins to ride away, and Santiago calls after him, asking where he lives, and the horse rider points south. It was the alchemist. Morning comes, and Santiago's premonition was correct. An army attempted to take the oasis, but the oasis was prepared, and the only deaths were those of the enemy. Santiago gets his gold and a job offer to be the councilman of the oasis. As night falls, he makes his way to the alchemist's house. They have dinner, and the alchemist invites Santiago to come back the next day with a horse to learn more about the desert. Santiago understands he has met another person who will help him on his way to realizing his personal legend. The next night, the alchemist asks Santiago to find life in the desert. He figures out that he may not know the language of the desert yet, but his horse knows the language of life, and finds a snake near some rocks for the alchemist. This feat lets the alchemist know that helping Santiago will be worth it, and he says he will be his guide through the desert. Santiago is hesitant, wanting to stay with Fatima. Then the alchemist tells him in detail what the next 4 years of his life will be like if he stays. It ends in sadness and frustration. It takes all of Santiago's willpower, but he agrees to go with the alchemist. After all, Fatima has already found her treasure in Santiago. She would want him to find his too. She tells Santiago as much the morning of his departure. They talk and cry and hug, and eventually they say goodbye. Now we enter what I like to call the desert lessons portion of the story. The alchemist tells Santiago about alchemy in the Emerald Tablet. He says to understand alchemy, one must understand the soul of the world, and to do that, he recommends Santiago immerse himself in the language of the desert. The alchemist also tells Santiago to listen to his heart, because that is where his treasure will be. Santiago finds this confusing, as his heart is very spazzy and needy, always agitated over one thing or another and always wanting things. The alchemist says that is good, and Santiago's heart is alive and he can already hear what it has to say. Santiago spends many days talking it out with his heart. They agree to work together to get to the pyramids. When he tells the alchemist of this, he seems satisfied and says Santiago and his heart will have to work together to reach the treasure, as the universe will now throw everything he learned right back at him like a cumulative exam. He says every search begins with beginner's luck, and every search ends with the victors being severely tested. This reminds Santiago of the saying, the darkest hour of night comes before the dawn. The severe test turns out to be being captured by a military camp and told he must turn into wind in 3 days, and if he cannot, the leaders will kill him and the alchemist. Santiago is livid with the alchemist for promising the military leaders something impossible, and why would he do that? He's going to die now. But the alchemist says he can already turn into wind, he can just blow away. Santiago spends his 2 days stressing and trying to connect with the desert, and on the 3rd day, with the camp leaders and the alchemist watching, asks the desert if he could turn into the wind. The desert likes that Santiago appreciates it and has made an attempt to speak its language, and decides to help by giving its sand to the wind and recommends Santiago speak to the wind next. The wind is prideful and upset that it doesn't know how to turn Santiago into wind and suggests he speak to the heavens. It then takes the sand the desert offered and whips up a sandstorm to block out enough light that Santiago can look at the sun to speak with it. After a lovely conversation with the sun about love, which the sun enjoyed, it reveals that despite being considered the wisest being, it doesn't know how to turn Santiago into wind. The sun says, "Speak with the hand that wrote all." Santiago turns to the soul of the universe, and in a silent, wordless prayer, pours all his love for everything over it. He sees that the soul of the world is part of the soul of God, and he is part of it all. He understands that he, a simple shepherd boy in the desert, can perform miracles like turning into wind. The alchemist is proud of his student, and the military leader is happy to know that this random guy understands God. He lets Santiago and the alchemist leave and even provides them with an escort. After half a day's ride, they come upon an old Coptic monastery. The alchemist cooks some gold with his philosopher's stone, and gives a 4th of it to the monk as thanks, a 4th of it to Santiago so he will get the rest of the way to the pyramids, keeps a 4th for himself, and leaves the last 4th at the monastery for Santiago on his return trip. Then he says goodbye, and begins his journey back to the oasis. Santiago rides on, listening to his heart, which speaks of many things all at once and makes him have to listen hard to find where his treasure might be. It whispers that his treasure will be where he is brought to tears, which happens when he crests one last sand dune and sees the marvelous and very real pyramids of Egypt before him, illuminated by the moon. He takes a moment to reflect on what he has accomplished and thanks all the forces that got him there. A scarab beetle scuttles past at his knees, and remembering that scarab beetles symbolize good luck in Egypt, he begins to dig. He has been digging for hours and finding nothing but scraped hands when a group of people find him and rob him. They demand he keep digging, thinking he was burying gold, and eventually Santiago manages to tell them he is digging for treasure, because he had a dream that there was treasure here. At that, the leader says they are leaving. He walks back just to tell Santiago that he wasn't going to die, he's going to live, and always think about how stupid he must be to think there was treasure somewhere because he dreamt it. Why, the leader had a recurring dream at this very spot that somewhere in Spain there was an old ruined church where shepherds and their sheep slept with a big sycamore tree growing where the sacristy was, and if he dug at the roots he would find treasure. Preposterous! He wasn't so stupid as to cross an entire continent on a whim. He leaves, and Santiago experiences a burst of joy as the pyramids seem to laugh at him. He knows where his treasure is. Okay, technically the book ends right here, but there is an epilogue, so I will include that. Santiago stands at the base of the sycamore tree, at his ruined church in Spain, shovel in hand. He digs a hole, and sure enough, a little chest containing gold, gems, and ornate masks. He laughs, and wonders why the universe and the old king wanted him to go to the pyramids of Egypt. A familiar voice on the wind says, but they were beautiful, weren't they? And Santiago has to agree. He also learned the freaking language of the world and found his true love, which is pretty sweet. He remembers he still owes the dream interpreter a tenth of his treasure, and thinks about how smart she was. Then he packs up and feels at peace, knowing he can return to Fatima now.